first video I've done for quite a while, so hopefully I can make it work for you. I had some recent issues with updating the Paladin PL18 from FlySky firmware. I was going from the stock 1.30 I think it was to 1.4 and had an issue where immediately after the update the sticks would not operate. So we can see here I've been able to replicate it actually by making a couple of changes, and as we move the sticks we get no response. It's currently telling us to that they're not in the lowest position, as well. Pretty sure she pronounces it as lotus. So I'll skip forward a couple of little bits in this part of the video because you may even notice the audio here is slightly different. The microphone I was using, I wasn't aware was it didn't have the phantom power, so it hasn't really picked up that well. So I'll try to just pick up what I was saying previously, also without listening. So the Paladin has 3 different screw types you need to be aware of before you pull it apart. I'm actually noting here that it's a hex 2.0, however it was actually a hex 2.5, and that's these screws here. They're in the top right hand and left hand corner, as well as in the bottom holding the base on. So the other screws we've got, and something just to note is before you turn it over and start undoing things, put your protective covers on. I couldn't quite find mine here while I was doing this. So we've got 4 Phillips head screws in corners, so you've got to take the rubber hand grips off. And then we've also got 4 hex heads here, which I think are a 1.3mm. I used actually a Torx T6 for these. Just happen to be missing the appropriate hex head to undo this one. So I'll just spare the time and just forward through this. Once you've undone all the screws and you get to the point where you are undoing this, you actually have to you may have to jiggle these out by just slightly separating the bottom as well, and they'll pop out a little better, like that. Now what actually got me thinking to remove the back in the first place was sometimes in shipping I've had connections that have been a little bit loose. We can see here all the connections that cover everything on the back plane, antennas, the charge controller, batteries, where they connect back to the front module. And we see here the connectors for the PCBs for the gimbals. So it comes from that side all the way down the back here, and then there's connections from one gimbal to the other, and then that's pretty much just a PPM connection back over the other side. So as I said, the reason I thought of doing this in the first place was maybe it was those connections were loose. but in the end, more than likely, it was because I've now experienced the problem a couple of times. Is that I think it's the just a residual memory in the non-volatile RAM. So when you're putting it back together, just make sure it's nice and firm together. They've done a really good construction job on the Paladin, meaning you don't have cables that are likely to be squashed in between points, but just make sure nothing's come loose in as you've manipulated things. So next we turn the transmitter back on and we tell it to transmit because we want it to activate the warnings. And we can see here the switch is up and also the throttle, not in the middle, which is what we were getting before, but we'll notice if we click the switch and move the throttle, it's now picking up that the throttle has been moved. So that's pretty much the fix straight away. And we can confirm that further by going to the display servos, and we can see that that is now moving. And just switching to another microphone too, this is probably a better microphone. If we go and open the firmware updater, I'll go back to the previous firmware and I'll just grab that from the other screen. So we can see now here going from version 1.0049 to 1.40. So it says it's ready to update, but I haven't actually changed anything on the remote, which is actually strange because the previous version before that, when I first did it, you wouldn't see this even show up as ready for update until you told the controller to be ready to update. So that could possibly be something in the later version. So let's change this. Now we get this message here, which of course is because I had told it to update, but it wasn't doing an update. So now we're ready for update. Update, and we get a progress bar. So we're sitting at 46% at the moment. A couple of times I found it did take a little while to do certain portions. And we don't see any change on the controller itself. It is a slightly different message on the controller in this version. I've found a couple of times the update going from, if you go from one version to another version, it does take a bit longer. If you go from the same version to the same version, such as doing just a reprogram, it doesn't take quite as long. So I think their updating software does at least have the smarts to know it's going across different versions, so it does perhaps a different style of arrays in the first place. And once it gets to the end, it will automatically reboot the device for anyone who's never done any firmware updates on these before. Right now, there it is. So on the device, we just turned back on. So probably the most annoying thing with doing a firmware update is the defaults, such as the sounds that you might have already turned off, are now back on again. And in this case, I've told it to transmit on startup, and immediately we can see that it's had no errors, so it's kept the sort of the good version of the EEPROM, so to speak. So from here, what we're going to do is try the reverse again and go back from our 1.40 to 1.49, and I'll just forward through that. I also didn't quite notice that by the time I switched over to running the firmware update, I hadn't flicked my cameras over, so it would take it from around about 49% of the update. So it's still going just a bit quicker than the other version. Again, one thing to note is after, I suppose after you've done an update, it does clear your model memory. So I might do a separate video on the process for a full update as a separate video. And there we go. So we can see here it's picking up that one switch is not active. Interesting thing was I had the throttle down and moved it up during the middle of the boot, but it didn't pick it up, so it must be only at the very start of the startup that it does the check. We can see here, so this has gone from 1.40 to 1.49 and it's working. So I'd say overall it's just a bit of a minor sort of a transient glitch. Doesn't seem to happen all the time during updates, but for me I've been able to reproduce it. I can't exactly say how, but I've been able to reproduce the fix as well, which, as I said, is as simple as removing the back, removing the battery. My first time that I removed it, I probably had it off for about a minute while I checked the cable connections. When I did it prior to or after the update from 1.40 to 1.49, I had it disconnected for about 2 minutes. And in the test just a couple of minutes ago, it was probably about 10 or 15 seconds. So I think just long enough for the NVRAM to dissipate any saved settings, and that's about it. So hopefully that helps you out if you have any update problems like I did. Happy flying.